In James chapter 4, as we look in verses 6 through 8 tonight, there is something that we see here, three key things, so that you and I might have a continuous revival in our lives. I was just able to be part of a service for a week last week, and the desire of the church was revival. So this is not a message from last week. It is the after effects of thinking about that week and praying for folks from last week. And what is revival? Can we not be revived because we didn't have a revival service all week long and they did? No, that's not the case, because revival doesn't come about by having a revival service. I cannot cause a revival, but a revival individually happens in every single one of our hearts. It starts with us. And us with the Lord in relationship and what our desire would be. And so I'm afraid some people look at revival as getting a little excited for a while, and then they need another revival service. But the Lord can rightfully expect a continuous revival in our lives. Look at the things we just sang to our Lord about that He has done and all that He is. It should be continuous in every single one of our lives. We do not have a revival happen in our lives by setting and making a list of everything we're going to do or setting a set of standards. Summing up a great major thing in revival, that's going to be you and I loving Jesus. To love Jesus to where nothing can get in between that. Revival should be expected to be continual in our lives, and it can be. And we're going to look at three key actions, if you will, needed for revival in our lives. And so what we're going to see in these three verses is that we are to humble ourselves before God. We are to submit ourselves to God, and we are to draw near to God. These three things are significant helps for you and I to remain in continuous revival in our lives. Look with me at verse 6 as we consider humbling ourselves before God. It says, "But He giveth more grace, wherefore He saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble." Pride is always going to try to creep up in our lives. Pride rises in our lives when we can't even detect it and we can't see it. We need to get to know ourselves a little better. How do we do that? How about by the one who knows us better than we do? And He has written a book. And in this book, He has written about us. It's good for us to learn from the one who knows more about us the things that we need to become educated in about ourselves. In Mark chapter 7 and verse 21, Jesus says, "For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed many things. I'll just read them. Evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile the man. Pride comes about in many ways. There's many things about pride that are, it just covers a vast area. It's not just arrogance. It's not conceit. Pride comes about in many different ways. It manifests in many different ways. Proverbs chapter 13 verse 10 says that only by pride cometh contention. The arguments, the debates, the strife, that comes about by pride. The great concern for us in that is that God resisteth the proud. God is against pride. There's resistance upon us whenever we act in pride. We don't want God against us, but it happens by us living pridefully. What does pride look like? You know, it's not just the typical arrogance and conceit of a person. What does it look like? Well, let me paint this picture. How about us making decisions in our lives without seeking the Lord? That's pride. How about not seeking the will of God for our lives, but doing our own thing? That's enough right there for us just to stop and think about this pride and how God resisteth the proud. You know, and naturally in our flesh, we want to be proud of ourselves. We want to take pride in this and that. And taking pride in your country, that's one thing. That's not negative, but there is a pride that comes from within, out of the heart of men, and God resisteth that. But He giveth grace to the humble. That sounds good. What is being humble? It's not criticizing and talking down about ourselves. It's not a false humility. Humility is when we realize our need for God continually in our lives. By the way, we can't humble ourselves, but God, and just knowing who He is and seeing our lives and discovering that we need God. This is all God working in this. And He is the humbler. He humbles us. When does it happen? When we come to a realization that we need God for everything. This is not a dreadful or a discouraging realization. When we realize we're so weak that we always need God. When we really see that we need to rely on God, and that we can, and that's what He wants us to see, and to know that He wants to help us, that is a joyful discovery. It is an amazing experience. In 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 5, it says, "Likewise, ye younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another, and be clothed with humility. For God resisteth the proud, and giveth grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that He may exalt you in due time." The one who operates in pride tries to raise themselves up. The one who is walking in humility is raised up by God. God exalts the one who is walking in a humble fashion. In the 34th Psalm, verse 17, there is a picture here of humbling ourselves before God. Please listen to the 34th Psalm and verse 17. It says, "The righteous cry, and the Lord heareth, and delivereth them out of all their troubles. The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivereth him out of them all." For God to use us, you know what He has His eye on? He has His eye on our weaknesses. Not our strengths, not some great ability. Paul says, "For when I am weak, then am I strong." For us to realize our need to depend on God is for us to realize our weakness. And when we see that we are weak, then His strength comes forth in our lives when we depend on Him. When someone knows they need God, this is what gets God's attention. This is what attracts God to working in our lives. He shows us that we need Him. In different circumstances, He puts in front of us in our lives, and so that we can know that we need Him. There was a young Christian, and he was so very much on fire. Many good things going on. And the old battle-tested Christian said, as someone asked about the young man, he said, "Yeah, he's a good Christian. And after he goes through some trials, he'll be a great Christian." God pours His power and ability into the life that needs Him, that learns how to depend upon Him daily, not the life that thinks they impress God with their life, but the life that cries out, not the life that cries out, "Look at me, God, look what I'm doing for you," but the life that says, "I'm in such desperate need of you to be able to live for you, God." You've probably heard about the elaborate introduction of the great missionary Hudson Taylor. He was called to the podium to give a speech before a group, and so many accolades went out in the introduction of the great missionary Hudson Taylor, and compliments left and right, and cheers, and he came to the podium, and he paused for a minute, and then he said, "I am a little servant of an illustrious master." We come to know that about ourselves, and we come to know that about God when we realize He's not just somebody good to have around. Church is not just good for appearance. We're here because we need Him. We need God in our lives. It's a wonderful personal discovery that we are just sinners saved by grace. When we don't try to find our identity in money, number of Facebook friends, status in this world, or success on the job, but when we desire that our identity is in Jesus Christ, this is you and I humbling ourselves before God. A key to continuous revival in our lives. One of the things that will not hinder it is if we're humbled before God. Pride will stop up the line of revival. But may we humble ourselves before God. but also look in verse 7, may we submit ourselves to God. Submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. I am so glad that this verse is so simple. Let me read it again. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. This isn't a one-time thing. It is continuous. But look at the power. Look at the promise we have when we submit ourselves to God and follow His instructions. Life lacking submission to God is the one that's always arguing and in a fight and quarreling, fighting for self. True submission to God is when we find our own will of very small value and His will for our life as priceless. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. His will versus our will, and we drop our will. We lose our will. You know, in sporting events, you know, the aim of one team is to break the will of another team. And that's not good in that sense. But it's good whenever God breaks our will for His will in our lives. We want God's will and we submit to it when we submit ourselves to God. And being convinced, we know that there's going to be an inconvenience. There's going to be something that we think we're not going to like in God's will, but we come to know it's best and we submit ourselves, therefore, to God. I would like to read a picture of submission to God's will from the 91st Psalm. This is submitting ourselves to God. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him will I trust. Surely He shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. He shall cover thee with His feathers, and under His wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. Submit yourselves, therefore, unto God. If Jesus in the garden said, nevertheless, not my will, but thy will be done, what are we going to do? If Jesus is giving up His will for the Father's will, how would it be okay for us to continue in our own will? You know, I listened to a hymn on YouTube. I found a guy, Kevin Murdoch showed me this guy, and he sings so beautifully. And he sings so beautifully, I forget the hymn I was listening to. But I remember what he said. He kind of sits there in his living room and introduces the song. He gives the background of the hymn, and then he says, this is one that I don't know if we ought to be singing until we stop and meditate and pray about it, and we really mean it. And I don't need to know which hymn it is, because the one that comes to my mind concerning what we're talking about tonight is, have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Thou art the potter, I am the clay. Do we mean that? We mean that when we are submitting our lives to God. We may need to listen instead of sing that song the next time it comes about because of the words in our song. We must lose our own will for God's will. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. and resist. It doesn't just say resist the devil. I've heard people bring this verse up and forget the beginning of it. And they just say resist the devil. We can't until we submit ourselves, therefore, to God. How good is it to submit ourselves to God? Because when we submit ourselves to God's will, we're not going to be doing the devil's will. Let me catch something that in thought that just happened there maybe. I'm not doing anything real terribly bad. I'm not doing the devil's will. What about when we're not doing what we should be doing? He's very tricky and he's very deceptive. When we submit ourselves to the Lord Jesus Christ, we are not submitting our lives to Satan. How wonderful is that? Romans chapter 6 and verse 16 says this, "Know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are, to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness." Oh, some people say this Christian and that Christian is just too black and white. I don't see a gray area in Romans 6:16. We're going to yield ourselves one way or the other. We're not resisting the devil when we're feeding on the things of this world. Whether it be something on the phone, whether it be something on the TV, whether those things turn into something we imagine in our mind to submit to Him. That's what we would be doing. We must learn how for our will to become God's will. We have the petitions we ask for when we ask according to God's will. When our will becomes His will. And we must do this thing willingly. Because God has a way. He loves us too much to leave us like we are. So God has a way to where if we're not willing to submit to His will, He will lovingly bring circumstances into our lives that will lead us and guide us to see that we need His will in our lives. Humble ourselves before God, submit ourselves to God, and then look at verse 8. We need to draw near to God. Draw nigh to God, and He will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. If we're not continuing to know God more and more, there's not going to be continuous revival. It's reviving to know God. When we know God, we know that God is always at work. And we get to a place where we see God's hand in it. I'm not saying we know everything He's doing, but we see that God's hand is in our circumstances. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And that brings us to the end of verse 8, where it says, "Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded." Draw nigh to God. It's not a one-time decision. It's a continual thing over and over. And we must do this with God. We need to comprehend Him. We need to be cleansed, it says at the end of the verse. We need to labor for the Lord with a clean heart. We can't add work for the Lord unless we're subtracting sin from the life. We can't do both. We can't add closeness to Christ without subtracting our iniquities. The 51st Psalm, one of my favorite psalms, one of my go-tos for many things in my own personal life. And one thing we find according to the text here, purge me with hyssop, cleanse me. And there's such confession from David, and there's such cleansing desired for David. Draw nigh to God. Get to know Him more for continual revival. I met my wife about 30 years ago. And when we met, I wanted to know things about her. And I pursued finding out things about her. What she likes. What she likes to do. Where she likes to eat. That was a long list of restaurants. And they're still growing. What makes her laugh? I pursued that, what her family's like, what her family traditions are like. I pursued all of that because I wanted to know her more. And when that happened, we got so close that nothing can get between. Draw nigh to God, and He will draw nigh to you. That's what He wants for our life, for continuous revival. Humble yourselves, therefore, before God. Humble ourselves before God, submit ourselves to God, and draw nigh to God. Continuous revival in our lives. We will see it by that. And I hope something has been a blessing for tired folks who love the Lord, who have come to worship Him tonight. And may you all be blessed as a result. Brother Jeff Smith, good to see you feeling better. Thank you for where you have stepped in to serve. God bless you for that. Also, your wife's still way out of town? Okay. Pray for Candy and the family. Traveling home tonight. Pray for their safety. Love you all, and God bless. Go ahead, brother.